Welcome back to Bar Girl Buddies. Today's story is going to hit different than our usual episodes. We're not talking about bar scams or romance gone wrong or someone getting their heart broken by a girl they met on Walking Street. This one's quieter, more insidious. It's about something that doesn't make for dramatic YouTube thumbnails, but it's destroying expat dreams just as thoroughly as any bar girl ever could. We're talking about money. Specifically, the slow, suffocating squeeze of watching paradise price itself out of your reach month by month until the math just stops working and you're forced to admit that the dream is over. This is the story of Derek Chen, 31 years old, from Vancouver, Canada. Derek moved to Pattaya in late 2019 with what he thought was a bulletproof plan. He had a modest remote income as a freelance software contractor, no debt, and he'd done the math obsessively. Thailand was supposed to be his forever home, the place where his money actually meant something, where he could live well instead of just surviving. And for a while, it worked exactly like he'd imagined. But then, the prices started climbing. And climbing, and by early 2025, Derek found himself staring at spreadsheets at 3 in the morning trying to figure out how his paradise turned into just another expensive city he couldn't afford. Before we get into his story, I want you to do something. Comment below and tell me where you're watching from. If you're in Thailand right now, tell me if you've felt the cost squeeze. If you're planning to move, tell me if stories like this change your calculations. And if you've ever had to abandon a dream because the numbers simply stopped working, hit that subscribe button because you're going to relate to every word of what comes next. Alright, let's hear from Derek himself. I need you to understand what my life was like in Vancouver before any of this makes sense. I had a decent setup on paper. I was doing contract web development and pulling in about 5,500 Canadian a month after taxes. Sounds okay, right? Except, Vancouver is brutally expensive in ways that don't show up until you're actually living there trying to make it work. My apartment was a 400 square foot studio in Burnaby, which isn't even properly Vancouver, and it cost me $1,900 a month. The place was so small I could touch both walls if I stood in the middle and stretched my arms out. The windows faced a concrete wall. I got about 45 minutes of indirect sunlight on a good day. Food was expensive. Going out was expensive. Dating was a joke, because every date meant dropping $60 minimum, and I was competing with finance guys who thought nothing of spending $200 on dinner. I had a gym membership that was $79 a month for a place that smelled like industrial cleaner and had equipment from 2005. I was saving maybe $400 a month if I was disciplined, which I usually wasn't, because what's the point of making okay money if you can't even enjoy a beer without calculating whether you can afford it? But the worst part wasn't the cost of living. It was the greyness. Vancouver's beautiful if you're into mountains and forests and all that, but the city itself is grey concrete and grey skies and grey rain from October to May. I'd wake up in my tiny apartment, work on my laptop in the same spot I slept, maybe go to a coffee shop if I needed to feel like a human being, then come home and repeat. I was 28 years old and I felt like I was 45, burnt out, lonely, going nowhere. Then the algorithm did what the algorithm does. I started getting YouTube recommendations for expat channels, guys living in Thailand, the Philippines, Vietnam, but Thailand kept coming up, specifically Pattaya. I know what you're thinking. Pattaya has a reputation, and yeah, I knew about the bar scene and all that, but these channels weren't about that. They were showing normal life. Western guys in their 20s and 30s living in modern condos, eating incredible food for basically nothing, working out at nice gyms, going to the beach whenever they wanted. And the costs they were throwing out were insane to me. One guy showed his monthly budget, Condo in Jomtien, $300 a month. Food, maybe $200 if he ate out every single meal. Gym, utilities, phone, motorbike rental, everything else. Another $200. He was living his entire life on $700 a month, and he had a sea view and a rooftop pool. I was spending more than that just on rent for a concrete box that made me want to die. I started doing the math obsessively. My 5,500 Canadian was about 4,000 US at the time, give or take depending on exchange rates. If I could live well on 1,000 US a month in Thailand, that left me $3,000 to save or invest or travel or whatever. $3,000 a month in savings. In Vancouver, I was saving $400 if I was lucky. The math was so obvious it felt like a cheat code. like I'd discovered something everyone else was too scared or too conventional to figure out. I spent 6 months researching. I joined expat forums. I watched hundreds of hours of YouTube. I learned about visa options and found out I could do back-to-back tourist visas or education visas, or eventually probably get an elite visa if I stayed long enough. I read about healthcare and found out it was cheap and actually pretty good. I learned which neighborhoods were for families versus which were for single guys versus which were for retirees. I became an expert on a place I'd never been. In November 2019, I bought a one-way ticket. I gave up my apartment, sold most of my stuff, packed 2 bags, and left. My parents thought I was having a breakdown. My friends thought I was running away from something. Maybe I was. But it felt like running towards something too. The flight landed in Bangkok late at night, and I took a taxi straight to Pattaya, which took about 2 hours. I remember rolling down the windows, even though the driver thought I was crazy because I wanted to feel the warm air. It was November, and it was still like 28 degrees. I'd left Vancouver in the rain, wearing a jacket, and now I was sweating through my shirt at midnight, and it felt incredible. Pattaya hit me all at once. The lights, the noise, the smell of street food mixing with ocean salt and exhaust and jasmine. I checked into a cheap hotel on Soi Buakau for 500 baht a night, which was like 20 Canadian, and it was nicer than my Burnaby apartment. I couldn't sleep because of the jet lag and the excitement and the noise from the bars below, so I went walking. Even at 2 in the morning, the streets were alive. Food carts everywhere, people laughing, music thumping from open-air bars, motorbikes weaving through traffic. It felt like the opposite of grey Vancouver in every possible way. The next morning, I had my first real Thai meal. Pad Thai from a street cart near Jomtien Beach, 60 baht. I sat on a plastic stool watching the ocean and eating the best noodles I'd ever tasted, and I did the math in my head. 60 baht was like 250 Canadian. In Vancouver, mediocre Pad Thai from a food court cost 15 bucks. I could eat this meal 6 times in Thailand for the cost of one bad version back home. Everything was like that. I spent the first week just wandering and testing the prices everyone had promised. 7-Eleven sold huge bottles of water for 7 baht. Coffee from a local shop was 30 baht. A full Thai massage was 200 baht and lasted 90 minutes. I got a haircut for 60 baht. 60. I was paying 35 Canadian back home for a 10-minute buzz cut from a guy who barely spoke to me. After 2 weeks, I found my first apartment. Studio in Jomtien, 5-minute walk from the beach, 7th floor with a balcony. 7,000 baht a month. That's about 290 US. The building had a pool, a gym, security, decent Wi-Fi. It wasn't fancy, but it was clean and bright, and it was mine. I signed a 6-month lease and felt like I'd just won the lottery. I bought a used bicycle for 2,000 baht. I found a real gym, not the condo gym, for 800 baht a month. It had new equipment, air conditioning, fewer than 20 people at any time. I established a routine fast. Wake up early, work from a cafe or my balcony, break for lunch at a local Thai place, work more in the afternoon, hit the gym, then either cook simple food at home or eat out for 100 baht. Evenings I'd walk the beach or meet up with other expats I'd met through Facebook groups. The expat community was bigger than I expected and way more normal. Yeah, there were the old guys doing the bar scene thing, but there were also tons of younger people. Digital nomads, remote workers, guys running online businesses, teachers, some retirees in their 40s who'd saved aggressively and checked out early. I clicked with a group of guys, mostly late 20s, early 30s from Canada, the UK, Australia. We'd meet for cheap beers, share job tips, complain about visa runs, talk about how we couldn't believe we used to pay what we paid to live worse lives back home. One Canadian guy, Tyler from Toronto, became a good friend. He'd been in Pattaya since 2018 and he had the whole thing dialed in. He knew where to get the best street food, which visa agents were legit, how to bargain without being a jerk, which beaches were still quiet. He was living on about 900 US a month and saving the rest. He told me he was planning to buy property in Cambodia or the Philippines in a few years with his savings and basically retire at 35. I thought he was a genius. I thought we all were. We'd figured out what most people never would. that you didn't have to grind until 65 in some expensive Western city just to afford a mediocre retirement. You could have freedom now. Quality of life now. Sun and good food and low stress now. 2020 hit a few months after I arrived, and COVID shut down the world. Borders closed. Pattaya emptied out. The bars shut down. The tourists vanished. For a lot of people, it was a disaster. But for those of us already living there with remote income, it was kind of amazing. Prices actually dropped. Landlords got desperate. I negotiated my rent down to 6,000 baht. Restaurants that used to cater to tourists started doing Thai prices. The beaches were empty. It felt like we had the whole city to ourselves. I upgraded my condo, found a one-bedroom in a newer building for 9,000 baht with a sea view. During lockdowns, I'd work on my balcony watching the ocean, and I'd think about my friends back in Canada stuck in their apartments, staring at walls, losing their minds. I felt guilty, but I also felt grateful. I'd made the right choice at the right time. Tyler and I, and a few others, formed a tight crew during COVID. We'd do socially distanced beach workouts, cook together, do visa runs to Cambodia before those shut down too. We were living in this weird bubble where the rest of the world was falling apart. That we were healthy and safe and paying nothing to live in what felt like a resort. By late 2021, things started opening back up. Tourists trickled back. Bars reopened. The city came alive again. I'd been in Thailand nearly 2 years, and I felt completely at home. I had my routines, my favourite spots, my people. I dated a bit, nothing serious, mostly just enjoyed being single in a place where dating didn't require a second mortgage. I was healthier than I'd ever been, running on the beach most mornings. Eating clean because good food was cheap. My freelance work was steady. I was saving about $2,000 US a month. I remember sitting on my balcony one evening in early 2020 with a beer watching the sunset, thinking this is it. This is the life I want forever. I'd cracked the code. I'd escaped the trap. I was 30 years old and I felt like I'd already won. Tyler came over that night and we were talking about the future. He mentioned his rent was going up. His building wanted 12,000 baht instead of the 9 he'd been paying. He was annoyed, but not worried. Still cheap, he said. Still way cheaper than home. I agreed. My building hadn't raised anything yet, but even if they did, what's a couple thousand baht? Still nothing compared to Vancouver. If I'm honest with you now, that was the moment. That conversation. That's when the slide started, even though neither of us knew it. We'd gotten comfortable. We'd started thinking of the prices as permanent instead of what they actually were, which was a temporary arbitrage that only existed because Thailand was still developing and we'd gotten in at the right time. We didn't think about what happens when development accelerates, when global inflation hits, when the world figures out the same secret we did and demand drives everything up. We just thought we were set, that this would last forever, that nothing could touch us. We were living in paradise and the math worked, and that's all that mattered. But math has a way of changing when you're not paying attention. The shift didn't happen all at once. That's the thing people don't understand about how dreams die. It's not usually some dramatic moment where everything explodes. It's slow. It's 1,000 small cuts that you don't notice until you're bleeding out and wondering when it all went wrong. For me, it started in late 2022. Little things. My favourite noodle lady near the condo, the one who made this incredible boat noodle soup, raised her prices from 50 baht to 70. 20 baht difference. That's less than $1 Canadian. I didn't even blink. Inflation, right? Everything's going up everywhere. At least it's still cheaper than home. Then my gym announced new rates. Instead of 800 baht a month, it was going to be 1,200 for existing members, 1,500 for new ones. I was annoyed, but I paid it. Still only like $40 US. Back in Vancouver, I was paying 79 Canadian for a worse gym. The math still worked. My condo building sent out a notice in January 2023. Lease renewals would see a 20% increase across the board. My 9,000 baht was going to 11,000. I went to the office to negotiate, and the woman behind the desk was polite but firm. That's the new rate. If I didn't want it, there were 3 people waiting for the unit. Demand was up. Russians, Indians, Chinese tourists coming back post-COVID, digital nomads flooding in because their countries were expensive and Thailand was open again. 20% felt steep. But I looked around at other buildings and everything was climbing. I paid it. Tyler wasn't so easy about it. His place went from 12 to 15,000 and he refused to pay. He spent a month apartment hunting and ended up moving to a cheaper building further from the beach. Older place, no pool, dodgy elevator. But it was 10,000 baht, and he felt like he'd won something by not giving in to the increase. I remember going to visit him, and the place was depressing. Small windows. Weird smell in the hallway. He kept saying it was fine, it was temporary, he was saving an extra 5,000 baht a month. But I could tell it bothered him. Around the same time, I started noticing the street food prices creeping up across the board. Pad krapao, that used to be 50 baht, was 70 or 80. Fried rice went from 40 to 60. Even the 7-Eleven prices were shifting. Everything just a little bit more. 10 baht here, 20 baht there. Individually, none of it was a big deal, but collectively, my monthly food budget went from around 6,000 baht to close to 9,000 without me really changing my habits. I told myself it was still cheap, still way cheaper than Canada, where a mediocre lunch was 15 bucks minimum. In Thailand, I was still eating well for $4 or $5 a meal. The problem was, the gap was narrowing and I wasn't acknowledging it. I was still comparing everything to Vancouver prices from 2009 instead of looking at the actual trajectory. Coffee shops were the same story. The local Thai places that charged 30 baht for iced coffee started charging 50. The Western-style cafes went from 60 to 90 to 120. I started making coffee at home more, which was fine, but it was another small adjustment, another tiny retreat from the easy abundance I'd gotten used to. By mid-2023, I was starting to check my bank balance more often. Not because I was broke, but because the cushion was shrinking. I'd gone from saving 2,000 US a month to maybe 1,200. Still decent, still better than I ever did in Canada. But the trend was wrong and I knew it. My friends started fracturing. 2 guys from the group, both Brits, announced they were moving to Vietnam. Da Nang, specifically. They said the prices there were what Pattaya used to be. Good coffee for $1. Nice apartments for 300 bucks. They tried to get me to come visit and scope it out, but I resisted. I'd built a life in Pattaya. I knew where everything was. I had my routines, my favourite restaurants. The staff at my regular places knew my order. Starting over somewhere new felt exhausting. I'd already done that once leaving Canada. I didn't want to do it again. Another guy, Australian named Matt, moved to the Philippines. He sent photos from his place in Dumaguete, beachfront apartment. Massive balcony. 400 US a month. He was rubbing it in a bit, but I could tell he was also trying to help. Trying to tell those of us still in Pattaya that the arbitrage had shifted. That Thailand was still okay, but it wasn't the deal it used to be. Tyler and I talked about it over beers one night. He was defensive. So was I. We'd invested time here. Energy. Emotion. We'd learned the language enough to get by. We'd built social circles. We knew the visa agents and the good tailors and which bars had honest prices. That knowledge had value. Walking away felt like admitting we'd been wrong about something fundamental. Just one more year, Tyler said. Prices will stabilise. This is just post-COVID adjustment. Once tourism fully normalises, everything will level out. I wanted to believe him. I told myself the same thing. Just one more year. The market will correct. Thailand's still developing. It won't get as expensive as the West. The fundamentals are still there. But the fundamentals were changing, and we were too stubborn or too scared to see it clearly. By late 2023, I was apartment hunting again because my lease was coming up, and I knew another increase was coming. I spent weeks looking. Everything had jumped. Studios that were 7,000 or 8,000 baht in 2020 were now 13,000 to 15,000. My one bedroom with a sea view that I'd gotten for 9 and then 11 was now going for 18,000 for new tenants. 18, that's over 500 US dollars for Pattaya, for a one bedroom that wasn't even that nice. I looked at cheaper options, places for 10 or 11,000. They were either far from everything I cared about, or they were old buildings with problems. Mold. Broken fixtures. Noise. The kind of places I'd moved to Thailand to avoid. I didn't want to live in a depressing apartment just to save 200 bucks a month. That defeated the whole purpose. I ended up taking a place for 14,000 in Jomtien, ground floor, no view, smaller than my previous spot. It felt like a downgrade in every way, but the alternative was paying $18,000 or moving to a neighborhood I didn't want to be in. I signed the year lease and tried not to think about what it meant. Food kept climbing. By early 2024, my regular Thai meals were consistently 80 to 100 baht. Western food, if I wanted it, was 200 baht minimum for something basic. A burger and fries at a decent place was 250 to 300. That's $10. Not insane by Western standards, but it used to be half that. The value proposition was eroding. Utilities went up. My electric bill during hot season went from 1,200 baht to over 2,000 because I was running the aircon more and rates had increased. Water, trash, building fees, everything ticked upward. My motorbike rental went from 2,500 to 4,000 baht a month because the rental companies knew they could charge it. I started tracking my expenses properly for the first time. I'd always had a rough sense, but I'd gotten lazy because everything was so cheap it didn't matter. Now it mattered. I built a spreadsheet. Rent, utilities, food, gym, phone, transportation, visa costs, occasional entertainment. I was burning through about 60,000 baht a month. That's around 1,700 US depending on exchange rates. My income hadn't changed, still making about 4,000 US a month, so I was still saving 2,300 a month, which sounds great until you remember I was saving 3,000 when I first arrived. And the trajectory was bad. Costs kept rising. My income was flat. The gap was closing. I tried to cut back. Cooked at home more. Stopped going to Western restaurants. Skipped the bars most nights. Bought a cheaper gym membership at a more basic place. But there's only so much you can cut before you're just surviving instead of living, and the whole point of being in Thailand was to live well on less money, not to scrub pennies in a hot apartment. The thing that really shook me was a medical situation in June 2024. I got some kind of infection. Nothing serious, but it needed antibiotics and a doctor visit. I went to a private clinic, saw a doctor, got prescribed meds, paid the bill, 3,500 baht, $100, not terrible. But it wiped out my buffer for the month. I'd gotten comfortable not having savings beyond what I was putting away each month. I didn't have an emergency fund in Thailand because I figured I could always go home if something really bad happened. But this little scare made me realize how precarious it all was. I started running scenarios. What if my income dropped? What if I lost a client? What if I got actually sick or injured? Yeah, I had travel insurance, but the deductibles were high. I'd need cash on hand. But I didn't have much cash on hand because I'd been sending my savings back to Canadian investment accounts. I was liquid poor in Thailand, which was fine when everything was cheap, but now felt risky. Tyler left in August 2024. He didn't make a big announcement, just told a few of us at a beach meetup that he was moving to Chiang Mai, said it was cheaper up north, more chill, less touristy. I knew he was also struggling with the costs, but neither of us said it directly. We kept up the fiction that it was about preference, about wanting a change, about mountains instead of beaches. After he left, I felt more alone than I had in years. Other friends had scattered too. The tight crew from COVID times was gone. Some back home, some to other countries, some deeper into Thailand. I was still in Pattaya, but it felt different. The community I'd relied on had evaporated, and I hadn't noticed until it was gone. By late 2024, I was actively researching alternatives. I looked at Chiang Mai like Tyler, at Da Nang like the Brits, at various Philippine cities, at Cambodia, even at going back to Canada and trying to find a cheaper Canadian city. Everything was a trade-off. Chiang Mai was cheaper but landlocked and smoky part of the year. Vietnam required a new visa situation and learning new systems. Philippines had safety concerns depending on where you went. Canada was Canada, expensive and grey. My lease came up for renewal in December 2024. The landlord wanted 17,000 baht. My 14,000 baht apartment that I'd already considered a downgrade was going up another 3,000. That's over 20% in 1 year. I tried to negotiate. I'd been a good tenant. Paid on time, no problems. Didn't matter. 17,000 or move out. He had people lined up. I couldn't do it, not because I couldn't afford 17,000 exactly, but because I couldn't afford it and still have the life that made Thailand worth it. At 17,000 rent plus everything else I was looking at, 70,000 baht a month minimum, 2,000 US dollars. I'd be saving 2,000 a month instead of over 3,000, and that's if costs stopped rising, which they clearly weren't. I started apartment hunting again, and it was worse than the year before. Anything under 12,000 was either trash or in areas I didn't want to be. Anything decent was 15 to 18,000. I found a place for 13,000 that was okay, older building, small, far from the beach, no gym, no pool. I'd be going backwards again. I sat in that apartment during the viewing, and I had this moment of clarity that felt like ice water. I was fighting to stay in a place that was slowly becoming as expensive as the place I'd left. Not quite there yet, but the gap was closing fast. And unlike Canada, Thailand offered me nothing if things went really wrong. No social safety net, no healthcare, unless I paid, no family, no long-term visa security. I was perpetually temporary in a country that was pricing me out. That night, I did something I'd been avoiding. I opened Numbeo and compared Pattaya to mid-tier Canadian cities. Not Vancouver or Toronto, but places like Winnipeg, Halifax, Saskatoon. The numbers were brutal. When you factored in quality of life, weather, security, long-term prospects, the Thailand advantage was marginal now. Yeah. It was still cheaper, but not 3 times cheaper. More like 20 or 30% cheaper. And that gap was shrinking every month. I opened my banking app and looked at my savings. I'd built up about 40,000 US over 4 years. Not bad. But it wasn't enough to retire on. It wasn't even enough to buy property anywhere that mattered. I'd been coasting on the comfort of cheap living instead of building real wealth or skills. My freelance rate hadn't increased since 2020. I'd been comfortable enough that I hadn't pushed for more work or better clients. I'd plateaued. I was 31 years old. I'd spent my entire late 20s in Thailand. I'd been happy. Genuinely happy. But I'd also been living in a bubble that was popping in slow motion, and I'd been too comfortable or too stubborn to see it clearly until the math forced me to look. The final moment came in February 2025. I was sitting in my ground floor apartment with no view in the middle of hot season, sweating because I was trying to save money on aircon, and I was scrolling through my phone looking at rent prices and doing the math for the 100th time, and I just felt tired. Tired of calculating, tired of adjusting, tired of watching the dream require more and more compromise. I pulled up flights to Vancouver. I pulled up rental listings in cheaper Canadian cities. I looked at my freelance pipeline and wondered if I could leverage my Thailand experience into better rates if I went back. I thought about what Tyler would say, what the old crew would say, whether I was giving up too easy or finally being realistic. I didn't book anything that night, but I knew it was over. Not immediately, but soon. Thailand had given me 4 incredible years. It had saved me from burnout. It had taught me what I actually needed to be happy. But it wasn't the permanent solution I'd thought it was. It was a phase, a window. And that window was closing. The Thailand dream wasn't a scam. It was real. But it required something I hadn't understood when I arrived. It required the margin to stay wide. And once the margin narrows past a certain point, you're not living the dream anymore. You're just living. And if you're just living, you might as well do it somewhere with long-term security and opportunities to grow, instead of somewhere you're perpetually temporary and watching costs chase you into corners. I haven't left yet. It's March 2025 now, as I write this. My lease runs until December. I'm still here, still going through the motions, but I'm looking at Vietnam seriously. At Portugal, which has its own digital nomad scene. At maybe sucking it up and going home to rebuild my income and try again in a few years somewhere else. I don't know yet. What I do know is that Pattaya isn't my forever home. It never was. I just wanted it to be so badly that I ignored the math until I couldn't anymore.